What's up guys, John Bird III here, and we're back again for another video. And in today's video, we're going to talk about a bait. I said let's call it an old school bait that still catches fish no matter what the conditions is, no matter the time of year, no matter what technology comes into play. This bait catches fish. But before we jump into that, if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Also hit that notification bell, that way you can be notified anytime a new video drops on the channel. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump into that bait. And that bait is, y'all can hear by the blades, the spinnerbait. So this is the Strike King tour grade spinnerbait. This is technically the only spinnerbait that I throw. I've thrown plenty of others before, but when I started using the Strike King tour grade spinnerbait, I felt very confident in using it, especially after I caught a few fish. This little backstory. So I've thrown some other spinnerbaits before in the past, and a lot of people tend to put trailers on their spinnerbait. So at the time, I wasn't really good at fishing spinnerbait, didn't have much confidence in it. So I put a trailer on the spinnerbait, like a little paddle tail, like a thinner paddle tail. I forget what it was, but anyway, I noticed that the spinnerbait that I was throwing at the time would always ride sideways, and I was just like, man, this ain't it. So I decided, you know what? Scratch the spinnerbait. I'm not gonna throw a spinnerbait no more. So then I decided, let me try these Strike King tour grade spinnerbaits. I like the way they look. I like the color patterns on them. And I said, I'm not gonna put a trailer on the spinnerbait. And ever since then, I've had total confidence on them. I've always catch pretty good fish on the spinnerbait, no matter the time of year, no matter what the lake is. And it just seems to work. And so I'm gonna kind of give you the full rundown from the rod, reel, the line, but also just kind of more in depth on the spinnerbait as a whole. So with the Strike King tour grade spinnerbait, one thing that I like about this particular bait is it has a wire tied skirt, and it also has a rubber band on there as well. That helps keep the skirt on the head of the spinnerbait. I don't throw no other size other than a 1/2 ounce. That is the only size I throw. So I throw a 1/2 ounce, and I only throw this color right here, and this is called Spot Remover. So basically what it is, it's just like a very light, and I'm gonna get a little closer so you can see it. It's just like a white and a very light chartreuse. So it's not that heavy chartreuse. And so I like this because sometimes like a white chartreuse spinnerbait, I mean, it's just a staple no matter where you are in the country. It's a great color pattern. But this chartreuse on here is more translucent, so it's not as bold as your traditional chartreuse and white spinnerbaits. And so this is the only color I throw. Spot Remover, 1/2 ounce tour grade spinnerbait. So Strike King just released the heavy cover spinnerbaits, and they have a beefier hook on them. And I'm curious to try that spinnerbait just around more heavier cover on like Santee Cooper, around those cypress trees, stumps, cypress knees, and all of that. But I feel like that spinnerbait you're gonna have to have a very specific rod for. And I'm thinking in my brain, maybe the Jig Worm Rod by Mark Rosa in the Signature Series, because it has a heavy power, so that gives you plenty of backbone to set that hook, because the hook on there is very big. And once I get some, I'll share them on the channel just to show you the comparison between your standard spinnerbait and the heavy cover spinnerbait. But it also has that mod fast action so that it'll load a little bit. So that might be the right rod. But once I get some and I try them out and I put them on that rod, kind of play around with it, I'll let you know which one is going to work the best. But tool grade spinnerbait, I mean, again, a lot of guys like to put trailers on their spinnerbaits, and I'm not that guy. But I mean, think about it. Jason Christie, the trailer he puts on the spinnerbait is something very subtle, very little. It's nothing beefy, nothing super bulky. It's very slimline. Also, I'm gonna give you a fair warning. If you hear a baby squeal, that's my little boy right here. So he may make a guest appearance today. We don't know. But anyway, don't be alarmed. He just been cranky today. But anyway, so but again, I don't have a lot of confidence with putting a trailer on there. But I mean, I guess to each his own, because normally whenever I throw a spinnerbait, I'm throwing it up on wind-blown points like on Lake Murray, because you know the bluebacks get up on those points, so I'm throwing it up there. And then on Santee, I'm throwing it in between the cypress trees and the stumps. But also doing the shad spawn on Lake Murray, throwing it down the side, going parallel with the side of the docks where the shad be running. That's a great place to throw a spinnerbait as well. So you kind of got to figure out on your lake where is the best place for you to do that. I just left Lake Lanier earlier this week, and we was in the way back of some of the creeks, because that's where the bait was. And then it was right there on the slopes throwing the spinnerbait up there. I caught a couple doing that. But also I remember I watched the old FLW video. I want to say it was Cumberland. And I think it was, I want to say it was Andy Morgan. He was throwing a spinnerbait way up in the backs of the creeks and stuff like that as well. So man, a spinnerbait is a great bait to throw year round. A lot of guys tend to focus on them mostly in the springtime, but again, you can throw it all year round. It's just depending on the lake that you're at, the type of cover that's going on, and also the conditions. So never can go wrong with throwing the spinnerbait. And just to think about it, like the spinnerbait kind of got put down just simply because the bladed jig, the chatterbait hit the market. And now we got tons and tons of bladed jigs. So not a lot of guys still throw a spinnerbait like that. And even right now today, so as you're watching this video, the spinnerbait has been playing a big part that I've heard on Bassmaster Live earlier this morning while I was watching a live coverage of the Elite Series today. So again, the spinnerbait, the bite will always be there, but again, you just have to make sure you're fishing it effectively. And we're gonna talk about the setup that I throw on there as well. I did a video on what I used to throw a spinnerbait on, but I don't think I've updated you guys on what my setup is. So, starting off with the rod, we have the all new Lew's Elite Series rod. So this is a 7-foot medium heavy fast. One thing I love about this rod is the cork handles. I just love cork handles. I feel like cork gives you that old school nostalgia, but also it just feels good in hand. I feel like I can hold on to it really, really good. Never had an issue with wind grips, but I just like the cork. I feel like this cork just, I don't know. It's hard to explain. It just feels good in my hand. That's what I like the most. The reel, I'm throwing it on the Team Lew's Tier 1 Series reel. And this is a 7.5 to 1 gear ratio. Now, that's what some controversy with throwing the spinnerbait comes in at. Because a lot of guys say, with a spinnerbait, you want a slower gear ratio like a 6.5 or 6.2, 6.8, whatever. I'm not throwing a 6-speed gear ratio on the spinnerbait. I feel like a 7.5 just works just fine. And now with forward-facing sonar, what I tend to do is I make a long cast with my spinnerbait. I check my different retrieves just to see at what speed do I turn my handle, how high that spinnerbait rides in the water column. That is one, I will say that is one, I guess you could say, pro to having forward-facing sonar, because you can see just how fast you need to turn that handle to either keep it down close to the bottom, to keep it right there in that mid-depth, or to keep it high. And sometimes with spinnerbaits, they'll blow out. And so if you're a guy like, if you're lake and you like to throw a spinnerbait and they like to burn it, Strike King also offers a burner spinnerbait, and it's designed for you to be able to throw it out there and burn it, burn it, burn it, burn it, burn it. So that's another little tip there. But I'm an old school type of guy when it comes to spinnerbait. Slow rolling that sucker, just making real slow little turns, letting those blades twitch or whatever, and just kind of letting the bait do the work itself. Sometimes you may have to do a little pop, but I mean, I guess that's just part of it. Another thing to keep in mind too, for all my beginners out there who are watching this video trying to understand the spinnerbait, a spinnerbait is very, very weedless. Like, this is probably one of the most weedless baits out there today, and they rarely get hung up. If you get hung up, I mean, sometimes it's just a simple pop, and it'll pop right over that lay down, and it'll drop right down. You can go back to, again, just slow reeling that bait. And it's just really, really cool just to really fish this bait. I love to throw this thing inside of a massive laydown, because seeing those fish come up and you just seeing that big white flash and they grab it and then you feel it at the end of your rod tip, it's like, man, it's kind of like, for me, it takes my adrenaline up. So it's super cool fishing the spinnerbait. But let me talk about blade combinations. A lot of guys, some guys really they like to tinker with their baits, and I'm not that guy. I'm not a bait tinker. I pretty much, for the most part, fish them straight out the pack as is, unless from time to time I switch out my treble hooks on certain baits. But my blade combination I like to throw a double willow leaf. In the springtime, when when your water is rushing in from the rain from the back of the creeks, is dirtying up your water, a lot of guys like to switch to like a big Colorado blade, and that big blade just turns and turns and turns, and what it is creating a lot of vibration in the water. I typically don't necessarily really do that, because I feel like you can just throw a bladed jig and you'd just be perfectly fine. But for me, just for confidence purposes and knowing like the certain situations where I throw a spinnerbait, the double willow leaf works just fine. Now, line. Typically, I throw 17-pound Contra or tour grade line. That is my go-to size line. I almost mimic to the T, almost, just with a little bit different rod. But I almost mimic my bladed jig setup because my bladed jig setup is an Andy Montgomery Signature Series bladed jig rod with a Pro TI 17-pound line. But the difference is that bladed jig rod is 7.3 medium heavy fast, and this is just a 7-footer. A lot of rods today on the market that are targeted specifically for a spinnerbait are short, like a 6'10". And in my brain, I'm like, that don't make sense. Like, why would you want a short rod to throw a spinnerbait on? But then I thought about it. If I'm going to the swamp and I'm throwing a spinnerbait, right? It's pitching in between trees, ducking and dodging stumps and trees and stuff like that. A shorter rod allows you to make those precise, accurate casts to really drop that bait right where it needs to be. Whereas sometimes when you get a longer rod, your accuracy goes down. So for me, a 6'10" for a spinnerbait, it makes me feel a little handicapped. And it's okay. But I decided instead of a 6'10", I'm gonna go to a 7-footer. That's in the middle of the pack for me because my general rod length that I like to use is somewhere between a 7.2 and a 7.4. And so a 7-footer is right in between the 6'10" and that 7.3, that range. So that's kind of best of both worlds. I'm pretty accurate with it. And it just kind of works. This rod loads very well. And again, when you pair it with the right reel, it balances very well. It's a balanced rod as is, but like this reel right here, this tier 1 reel, it's kind of on the heavier side. But again, like it feels really good in hand. And whenever you put a reel on a rod, and it just feels good in hand, you're actually able to fish a lot more confident and comfortable at the same time, because that means a lot. Because have you ever went fishing with a buddy and you're using their setups and it's like, man, this just feels like junk. Like this just don't feel right because they're dialed in. I guess you could say their dialed in setup isn't yours. So you just feel, you don't feel right. So once you find that right setup and you dial it in, you're perfectly set and you're good to go and you're ready to catch those big fish. So that's my spinnerbait setup. That's kind of my focus with the spinnerbaits. Now, again, you're going to see a lot of videos and you'll see a lot of guys out there talking about putting trailers on their spinnerbaits and stuff like that. Do you have to? No, it's really more so personal preference. I personally don't believe if you bulk up a spinnerbait, you're going to get bigger bites. Like, I really don't believe that. And that's just me. That's just my thought process. And that's just based off what I've already experienced in my years of fishing. Like, I don't believe in bulking up, you get bigger bites. I feel like if you put it right there on top of a big bass's head, they're going to grab that sucker no matter if it got a trail on there or not. Because you have to keep in mind, a bass is a reactionary creature. Point blank period. If you throw a bladed jig and it just blows past them, they're going to feel that vibration coming behind them already. And so what it's going to do is it's just going to entice them to go and attack your bladed jig. Same thing if you just a pitch a Cinco or a wacky rig Cinco right there and it falls right in front of their face. What you think they're going to do? They're going to grab it. Bass are reactionary creatures and we also have to keep that in mind. So sometimes doing all this modification to baits, sometimes it helps, but sometimes it's really more so a mental thing for the angler to help them feel more confident that they will be able to get a bigger bite or whatever. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to fishing, if you keep things simple, but also if you just stay confident in what it is that you're doing, you don't really have to worry about anything. You just go out there, focus, and just fish. And when you get the bites, that's how you build more confidence. The more you use something, or just in general with life, the more you do something, the better you get, the more confident you get. Same thing with fishing. The more you use a particular bait, the more you see what different situations you can use it in, and then the more bites you get on it and the more fish you catch, it just makes you more of a confident angler, especially in that specific technique. So keep that in mind whenever you're fishing, whether you fish from a boat, kayak, on the bank, pond, lake, river, stream, your bathtub, it don't really matter. Just keep that in mind anytime you're out there on the pond. But that's it for today's video. So if you like this video, make sure you hit that like button and make sure you comment down below. What's your favorite spinnerbait that you like to throw? Also, let me know, what trailer do you put on the spinnerbait, if you put a trailer on there at all? And give me the full rundown. Let me know your setup in the comment section. So that's it. I'm JB3. I got to get back to living the dream. I'll catch you later.